In my last couple of videos, I've been talking about the coping mechanism that's most common to us, and that is suppressing emotion and suppressing trauma, suppressing dysfunction in order to not get the negative side effects of PTSD and other trauma-based mental injuries. And while this can be very effective in actually preventing PTSD, it was highly effective for me, it could produce a litany of other negative side effects that might even be worse than PTSD in some aspects. And today I'm going to talk about probably the most negative one, and that is attempting to silence our guilt. So most people don't know this, but one of the primary triggers for PTSD and other trauma-based mental injuries is guilt. And if you think about it, it makes sense. Trauma in and of itself can definitely break you. And for some people, the trauma itself can be enough to fracture their psyche. But for most people, if you talk to them who have PTSD, usually they won't talk primarily about what negative happened to them. They'll talk about some sort of a feeling of guilt or regret, even if something that happened to them wasn't even their fault. So for instance, you might talk to a military serviceman who talks about the guilt of not just seeing his friends die, but of not dying himself. He somehow feels guilty that he survived what he went through. Or when you talk to someone who's been abused as a child, it's weird and strange that sometimes they carry with them an intense feeling of guilt, shame, or regret, almost as if they feel like they deserved what happened to them. And it's that guilt that makes them feel as though they deserve even the trauma and the PTSD that they have at the moment. Even people who have been through a bad divorce or a failed marriage or some sort of abuse like that, once again, they carry with it just this intense feeling of guilt, like they deserved what tragedy befell them. And I could go on and on with examples, but I hope you see my point. It's the guilt itself that could be the most traumatic thing for us. And so one of the things that we do in order to get over this is we attempt to silence our guilt. We attempt to suppress it, just like all the other negative emotions that we've been talking about. So the issue is suppressing your guilt. And I'll speak very frankly about some of the things that I did to suppress my guilt, is that it can actually turn you more and more into what we would call a sociopath, meaning that the distinction, one of the main distinctions between a sociopath and someone who has normal, healthy brain function in this particular area would be that sociopaths, first of all, are isolationists. They don't really see themselves as a part of any community but their own. But secondly, it's that they don't really feel guilty about the things that they do. They actually feel very complacent about it all. So it could turn you more and more into a sociopath. If you learn how to suppress the negativity of guilt in one area of your life, it's very easy to transpose that idea to all areas of your life. And that's what I saw happening to me. The more I learned how to shut out guilt in the area of what I did in the military, the more easy it was for me to shut out guilt in all other areas. It was a very, very negative thing for me. So let me open up about how this works in the military. So when you go through military training, you have to understand you're training a group of individuals to have to be able and willing to kill or at least do serious bodily harm to other individuals. And normally this is a very difficult thing to do. We are usually trained and raised up as children to believe that harming or killing another human being is one of the worst things that you can do. Now, again, I could give the moral and ethical arguments of just war and why these things are necessary, but at the end of the day, no matter how justified your cause may be, killing or hurting another human being will always make you feel guilty unless you could find a way to turn that off. And that's been one of the primary things that most militaries throughout the world are trying to do for the people that they have in their military. How did they do it in our military? So for us, some of the things they do, and it's very subtle, some of the things that they do to us is they train us how to see the enemy as merely the enemy. It's kind of like that us versus them mentality, the good guys versus the bad guys. And this can be everything from the type of movies that we're raised up on when you watch war movies. It's very one-sided usually. It's us versus them, the good guys versus the bad guys. It's even in the way that we talk in the military. We talk about the enemy. We talk about combatants. We talk about, and sometimes, you talk very frankly with a veteran. Usually they'll use some sort of a racial or derogatory slur against the people that they fought. So if you talk to a World War II vet, they'll be like, yeah, I fought the Krauts, I fought the Jerrys, I fought the Nazis, I fought the whatever. Or even if you talk to a Vietnam vet, they might say like, hey, I fought Charlie, I fought the Viet Cong. You talk to a modern day vet, they'll say, yeah, I fought the Hajis, I fought Al-Qaeda, I fought the Taliban, whatever. They'll have some sort of a racial slur, some sort of derogatory name or just the title of the military in general. Now, what's this doing? It's slowly reinforcing this idea in your head that yes, to kill people is wrong, but possibly the enemy isn't human. And this is a very effective strategy. It's been used, like I said, by militaries as long as the Earth's been spinning. And it's very, very effective to do for your military soldiers, because what you want to do is you want to prepare them to be able to do horrible things to the enemy, but to not take that mentality home. You don't want to create a military full of sociopaths who come home thinking it's okay to kill others. You want to maintain their moral structure while also enabling them to kill without remorse. Right? And this also helps you understand, if you're a student of history, it helps you understand some of the horrible things that have been done throughout the world. It's easy for us as a society to look at someone like Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, people like that, H.H. Holmes, and be like, yeah, these people were monsters, they were horrible, but they're the abnormal person. They're the fringe. They have some sort of a mental illness or disorder that enabled them to act that way. That's not how the majority of people are. Militaries throw a big monkey wrench into the ideology. Why? Because when you look at how militaries function throughout history, you see them doing horribly monstrous things, dare I say, worse than any serial killer that we've seen running rampant within Western society. You see military members, good people, raping, mutilating, torturing, laughing as they kill combatants and even non-combatants. You see horrible things happening in even some of the most quote-unquote justifiable wars in human history. Terrible things. Even in the Bible, you have an instance where King David went out and killed, I believe it was 1,000 Philistine soldiers, and he cut off the foreskin of their uncircumcised members in order to mock them. You have very, very grotesque things throughout history going on, even what you see the Nazis doing. And even to get a little bit more intimate with American history, when you look at the slave trade, how is it that an entire group, an entire civilization could look at the enslaving, the torture, the breeding, the treating like cattle of another group of human beings? Very simple. We taught ourselves that they're not actually human. You don't feel bad about raising cattle. You don't feel bad about slaughtering cattle. Why? They're not humans. They're not like us. The only way to justify horrible monstrosities against other human beings is to teach yourself that it's not actually a human being that you're doing these horrible things to. It's a very sick way to do things, but it's a very effective way to do things. Now, here's the issue. For a lot of us, even if we're able to do it while we're over there, because everybody else is doing it, everybody else is seeing things that way, you are laughing as you see people getting shot or killed, the enemy. You are mocking them. You are not caring about the collateral damage because you've trained yourself to believe that it's not really people. As effective as it is, once you come home, you're going to have to face the harsh realities of what you did. You're going to have to talk to your friends and family. And when you start telling them your war stories, you see the shock in their face and you start realizing, maybe what I did wasn't as innocent as I thought. And even if what you're doing is out of some sort of retribution, right? Maybe you saw one of your friends get shot or hurt. It makes it easier for you to be like, man, I'm going to get back at them. I'm going to show them. Even once that anger wears off, after that righteous indignation wears off, what are you left with? You're left with the sights of the bodies, the wreckage and the carnage that is grained up in your mind. And that's the stuff that I had to think about when I came back. And what happens to you is it creates a fracture in your psyche. And this is how that fracture goes. You have the good person, the moral person that you see yourself as, and then you have the monstrous actions that you've committed. And when you can't reconcile the two, it fractures your psyche. And once again, this is something that's universal. It's not just something for veterans. It could be, maybe again, you've gone through a terrible divorce. And as bad as the divorce was, maybe the thing that really haunts you is some of your bad behavior towards your ex-spouse. Some of the ways that you treated them, some of the even dehumanizing ways that you've talked about them to other people around you, and the things that you've taken from them, even the malicious things that you've done against them. And in your head, you could justify it. Yes, they deserve this. Look at all the things that they did to me. But maybe those things are not as justifiable as you think. Maybe those memories are haunting you a little bit more than you thought that they would. And maybe, again, your guilt is trying to tell you something. Now, it's not that your guilt is 100% correct. Sometimes our guilt can be misused or misproportioned, and sometimes our guilt can wreck us. But my point is that you'll never be able to find the truth behind your guilt, meaning you'll never be able to weigh things of what was actually wrong versus what you're just perceiving to be wrong unless you're willing to deal with your guilt, as opposed to just shutting it out and pretending it's not there. So in future videos, I'll talk about this, but from the Christian perspective, what we believe is we believe that guilt is something that God has given us as a result of having a conscience. So just as physical pain lets us know when we've done something physically damaging to ourselves, guilt is God's way. It's kind of like our pain receptor for when we do something morally or ethically wrong against Him or against others. So it's an important thing to have. To silence it completely, like I said, would make you into a sociopath. Most of us can't do that, and so what happens is it just delays the trauma. It just delays the time that it takes for your trauma to settle in, and that could be even more negative when it comes up. The correct way to deal with it is to deal with it before Him, and I'll talk way more about this in future videos. But for those of you guys who aren't Christians, just consider for a second that what I'm saying is true. That there is a God out there who loves you and cares for you, and that there is a morality that is objective, and maybe you violated it. Well, if you violated morality, if you've sinned against God, then the only person who can actually give you forgiveness, in other words, the only person who actually deal with your guilt and your conscience, is God. That's why in the book of Hebrews, the author of Hebrews says that Jesus Christ, through one offering, has cleansed our guilty conscience. He's actually offered us something that enables us to function before God, not apart from guilt, but with guilt that's been cleansed or guilt that's been forgiven. And that's the only real semblance of peace that I've ever been able to receive in my life. And that's something that I would greatly want to instruct and teach others to be able to receive. Receiving forgiveness is one of the greatest graces that God could ever give to us. So I do hope that this video has helped. I hope this has encouraged you to, instead of silencing your guilt, to begin to learn how to deal with it in an appropriate manner. Again, learn how to talk to God about this and to receive forgiveness from Him, but also learn how to talk to it about friends and family in a very real way. And in the future, again, I'm going to talk much more about this idea of forgiveness, but look forward to those videos in the future. Hey, this is Peter Martin, and if you've just finished this video, that means that you've watched one in a longer playlist on my new book called Fellowship of Suffering. This book deals with trauma and PTSD and how these things impact all of us. So if you've liked this video, please give it a like, please subscribe to my channel, and look forward to more content.